their way to victory. So the point is, therefore, that you can do everything you have to do in this spirit. Don't make a distinction between work and play. Regard everything that you're doing as play, and don't imagine for 1 minute that you've got to be serious about it. Let's take, for example, the rest of the world other than ourselves. Think for a moment, what are vegetables doing? Let's, for example, consider this. And what's it all about? I mean, it serves us, human beings, by being decorative. But what is it from its own point of view? See, because here is this stalk, and all these leaves come out, ka-ching, 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 all that stalk, then it whoops, it goes into this. And then it goes into flowers in the end, you see, and they go kitty, 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 all around. But I look at the thing, and it's like a symphony. It's just like Bach doing a fugue, with all the different movements going. And that's what it's about. What do you say? It's using up air, it's using up energy, it's really not doing anything except being ornamental. And yet here's the whole vegetable world. Not only cactus plants like this, but all trees, roses, tulips, and edible vegetables, cabbages, celery, lettuce. They're all doing this dance. And what is it all about? Why do we do it? Well, we say, one must live. It's necessary to survive. You know, you really must go on. It's your duty. It's your duty to your children. But you see, the thing I feel is if you bring up your children that way and tell them that they ought to be grateful to you because you're doing your duty towards them, they will learn to bring up their children in the same way, and everybody will be depressed. There really is no necessity to go on living. We think, you know, it's part of our Western philosophy, that we think we have a drive to survive, that we must go on living. Because some big daddy said to us, you gotta go on living, see? And you better make it or else. Well, I've already explained to you on this show that the fear of death is completely absurd. Because if you're dead, you've got nothing to worry about. So you'll be all right. So in the same way, you must not, I don't want to use that word, must not. Because I'm not trying to talk to you as an authority, I'm trying to talk to you as somebody who's opening your mind up, a helper, not a father figure. This thing here, this plant, I'm quite sure it doesn't say to itself, you ought to go on living. You've got an instinct to survive, which is something other than yourself and which you have to obey. See, I don't think of my own instincts as drives, which is the proper psychological term for them nowadays. I think of my instincts as myself. I don't say, excuse me, but I have an unfortunate desire to reproduce myself, and therefore I'm sexy, and would you please accommodate me? I don't say, excuse me, but I have to eat, and really it's absolutely necessary that I eat. I say, on the contrary, hooray! I am this desire to make love, and I am this desire to eat. It's not something else that pushes me around, it's me. Well, all right, but it doesn't have to go on. I don't feel so compelled that if it were to stop, well, if it were to stop, if I were to be killed, that would be another scene. That would be a different form of the dance. If I'm in pain, people say, don't scream, don't cry, because screaming or crying is a perfectly natural reaction to pain. When a baby is first born, they cut the umbilical cord and somebody smacks it on the bottom. And the baby, yeah! See? That's the first thing in the world. There is in Zen Buddhism a koan, which says that when the Buddha was born, he suddenly stood up and announced, above the heavens and below the heavens, I alone am the world-honored one. Well, everybody would say that was an extremely proud thing to say. So they give this to students of Buddhism as a problem. How could it be that the Buddha, as a little baby, was so proud as to make this pompous statement when he was born? And if you understand the problem correctly, you answer, see? Because that is the perfectly natural response to the painful event of being born into this world. But thereafter, we always say, baby, don't you cry. Shut up. We don't like to hear babies cry. Shut up. And therefore, we stamp out in human beings their natural release from the problem of pain. If you're in pain, cry. And if you can't do that, then pain is your problem. But if you can cry, and if you can let go in that way, pain is no problem. And if you get the shudders at death, the idea of death, the idea of not being here anymore, just get those shudders and dig them. Because the shuddering, isn't it curious? We sometimes say, you remember that song that said, I am not shivering cause I'm cold. I am not shivering cause I'm cold. I am not shivering cause I'm cold. I am just shivering with delight. You know, we get the shivers of delight. So all these emotions that we have, the emotions of uptightness, dread, shivers, horrors, can be interpreted in other ways. But we interpret them in a negative way so long as we are under the sense that you absolutely must go on living. Now you see, living, like this plant, is something spontaneous. In Chinese, the word for nature is zhiran, which means that which happens of itself, not under any control of an outside boss. And they feel that all the world is happening so of itself. It's spontaneous. And so you stop this spontaneous flowering of nature cold if you tell it you must do it. It's like saying to someone, you must love me. Well, it's ridiculous. If I were to ask my wife, darling, do you really love me? And she says, I'm trying my best to do so. That's not the answer I want. I want her to say, I can't help loving you. I love you so much I could eat you. And that's what the plant feels in growing. It doesn't feel that it must grow. It's not under orders. It's not a military chain of command. It does this spontaneously. So that when you try to command the spontaneous process, you stop it. It's like saying to someone, now, be unself-conscious. You know, there's a belief in India that if you think of a monkey while you're taking medicine, the medicine won't work. So therefore, when you take your vitamins or next pills, try not to think of a monkey. See? That will completely tie up the spontaneous process, and it won't work. So all the things that we say to our children, like, well, you must have a bowel movement every day after breakfast. Try, darling, to go to sleep. Stop pouting. Take that look off your face. Oh, you're blushing. make you feel guilty about blushing. See, all those things are attempts to say this one thing. Darling, little child, you are required to do what will be acceptable only if you do it voluntarily. And everybody on this account is completely mixed up, because we are trying to force genuine behavior. We all admire artists when we say,
well, what is the simplest shape in 3 dimensions? The simplest pixel of 3-dimensional reality would be the 3 simplex, which is just the common tetrahedron. So we imagined different patterns of tetrahedra and wanted to link up with a mathematical justification for how to use tetrahedra. And we realized that because E8, which is both an algebra and it has an analogous crystal form or lattice form, we realized that if you slice a section out of E8 and you project it to a lower dimension, like 4 dimensions, you get a quasi-crystal made of nothing but regular 3-dimensional tetrahedra in 4 dimensions. And they're arranged in this beautiful way that allows syntactical freedom on how you can arrange the tiles within rules. So it's a language or a code made of geometric shapes called a quasi-crystal. And because the E8 crystal in 8 dimensions, from which the 4-dimensional quasi-crystal language is encoding, right, in 8 dimensions, encodes unification physics, according to the work of a lot of other groups, then we realize that one can recover or unfold the unification physics in the lower dimensional projection of a higher dimensional thing. So the higher dimensional thing encodes realistic unification physics, and the lower dimensional thing also allows you to unpack or recover the higher dimensional information in the same way that people would view me as a flat 2-dimensional image. If they cover one eye and look at me, it's just flat, like a National Geographic photograph. But in their mind, they subconsciously just extrude me into 3 dimensions and interpret what they're seeing. They have a knowledge that my nose is closer to them than my ears, even though all they're really seeing is a flat 2-dimensional image. So this is an analogy to say that mathematically one can recover the information of a higher dimensional thing, like the E8 lattice that encodes unification physics, from the lower dimensional mosaic tiling code in 4 dimensions, which is a quasi-crystal.
Is it sort of naive to say that reality is 8-dimensional and we experience it in a 3-dimensional way that it encodes that 8-dimensional reality?
I don't think that reality is 8-dimensional. I think that it's best to be conservative and guess that it is what it appears to be until you realize that there is no theory using what you think it appears to be that will work. And it turns out that with quasi-crystal mathematics, we can have our cake and eat it too. We can say that the mathematics of a higher dimensional crystal and its related algebra defines the gauge symmetry unification physics that unifies particles and forces, but so too does its lower dimensional projection. So we have this lower dimensional code, this quasi-crystal mosaic tiling structure, and the fact is that embedded in this lower dimensional object is the information of this abstract, non-physically realistic, higher dimensional thing. And in this way, we have our cake and eat it too, because we can say, well, we don't have to admit that philosophically or ontologically reality has hidden higher dimensions just because the math implies that it relates to higher dimensions, because quasi-crystals in lower dimensions encode the higher dimensional information. All we measure is 3 spatial dimensions.
Why even bother with describing? So let's say that 3D reality is this quasi-crystal structure. Why do we have to even say that it's related, that it's mathematically projected from an 8-dimensional crystal? Like, why define the quasi-crystal by its 8-dimensional?
Okay. So the fact is that one can mathematically express the unification physics with the lower dimensional quasi-crystal, or
use 3D and not and 4D or 8D without saying lower or higher, because it's confusing, I think.
Okay. Well, I didn't get, yeah, okay, but you're going to have to eventually cut in, if this was a line of thought, you'd have to have cut in how we get from 4D to 3D.
I will
explain. Oh, you're going to, of course. All right. So the fact is that unification physics can either be based on the mathematics of a higher dimensional algebra or crystal, or the projection which transforms it. So when you project something, you transform it, right? So if you have a cube and you can feel it in your hands, and then you hold it up to the sun and project it to a shadow on the sidewalk, the shadow has different angles and different lengths of lines than the cube. It's been transformed. But if you knew about the geometry of how to unpack or recover the information of the full cube from the shadow, then that's an easy problem. So one can focus on a mathematical approach that only uses the higher dimensional crystal and see how far they can go, okay? Or one can take the transformation of the higher dimensional crystal to the lower dimensional space and see how far they can go. There's an important caveat, though. The quasi-crystal, the shadow or the projection, it's a 3-dimensional shadow of an 8-dimensional crystal slice. This quasi-crystal that we work with is actually more complicated than the higher dimensional crystal mother from which it was born. And the reason for this is because it is really a child or a product of 2 parents, the mother crystal and the father, if we can use this analogy, projector. So the projector is a special object. It's an angle, really, but it's a hypervector, a hyperprojector. And that hyperprojector combines with the hypercrystal mother, and the 2 together act as coefficients to produce a product, where products are generally greater than the sum of the 2 coefficients that created them. And so the quasi-crystal itself is a richer mathematical object, a more complicated mathematical object than either the father projector, the hypervector, or the mother crystal. And furthermore, it is distinctly a language, a mosaic tiling language in 3D.